What actually keeps you safe? In Deuteronomy chapter 8, we're going to see that prosperity, right, even material possessions, all of these kinds of successes can actually steal devotion faster than poverty can tempt it. And what's interesting is in this chapter, we'll learn how the wilderness actually shaped Israel to depend on God so that they wouldn't forget him in the land. So Deuteronomy chapter 8 shows how to keep gratitude from turning into self-reliance. And we'll figure this out in this episode of Biblical Unlocks. This show is designed to help build your habit of reading the Bible, understanding the Bible, and applying it in your daily life. If you enjoy episodes like this, please consider following the show and rating. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's get a little bit of context into the chapter. Okay, context. This chapter actually shows Moses, right? Again, Moses is reminding the new generation that God humbled them in the wilderness, fed them with manna, and tested them to know what was in their hearts, and will bless them in the land. But he warns that prosperity can lead to forgetfulness and pride. Deuteronomy chapter 8 frames blessing as a test. Remember the Lord, live humbly, and use abundance as a means of obedience, not as a means of ultimate security. So, let's make sure that we understand this in this episode. So, we're going to read the first 5 verses. The focus here is going to be how Israel was humbled in the wilderness and what that taught them. And my engagement question for you to stay focused is, why did God deliberately humble Israel? What was he shaping? Okay, verse 1 to 5. The entire commandment that I command you today, you must diligently observe, so that you may live and increase and go in and occupy the land that the Lord promised on oath to your ancestors. Remember the long way that the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness, in order to humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commandments. He humbled you by letting you hunger, then by feeding you with manna, with which neither you nor your ancestors were acquainted, in order to make you understand that one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes out of the mouth of the Lord. The clothes on your back did not wear out, and your feet did not swell these 40 years. Know then in your heart that as a parent disciplines a child, so the Lord your God disciplines you. Biblical unlock number 1. This is actually brilliant, right? Why would God intentionally humble his people with hunger and hardship? Well, we get the answer in verse 5. Know then in your heart that as a parent disciplines a child, so the Lord your God disciplines you. The Lord our God is a holy father, right? And if a holy father is tending to his children, making sure he wants the best for his children, he will discipline them and test them in ways which expose what they truly trust. Manna and daily dependence trained Israel to know that God is their only provider. He's not just a miracle worker from the past. And the point here is that trials can be formative. God uses scarcity to cultivate faith so that abundance will not produce idolatry or self-sufficiency. What's interesting is, we see here, he humbled you by letting you hunger, then by feeding you with manna, with which neither you nor your ancestors were acquainted. And this is the critical verse, in order to make you understand that one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. Jesus Christ quotes it in his temptation by the devil. The devil asks him, turn these stones into bread, right, if you are truly the Son of God. And what does Jesus reply? Jesus replies, but one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes out of the mouth of the Lord. He reframes it. He says, you do not live by bread alone. You live by the words of God, which is what we are reading right now. Okay, verse 6 to 10, this is going to be the blessing in the land and abundance. And the engagement question for you to stay focused is, how should prosperity change my posture toward God and my neighbor? Okay, verse 6. Therefore keep the commandments of the Lord your God by walking in his ways and fearing him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land with flowing streams, with springs and underground waters welling up in valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey, a land where you may eat bread without scarcity, where you will lack nothing, a land whose stones are iron and whose hills you may mine copper. You shall eat your fill and bless the Lord your God for the good land that he has given you. Okay, so Blessing in the land, we saw the abundance here. If God promises abundance, isn't it right to fully enjoy it? Well, of course, but with gratitude and stewardship. Blessing is always framed as a means of obedience or to obedience, whether it be feeding the poor, worship, faithful leadership. But abundance is not an end in itself. The land's produce should prompt praise and generosity, not forgetfulness. We have to remember, and this is a critical distinction, right? Are we worshipping the creation or are we worshipping the Creator? This is what St. Augustine, not St. Augustine, this is St. Thomas Aquinas, this is what he says. Who do we ultimately worship? And if we ultimately worship creation more than Creator, then we have a problem. Alright, final section of the chapter, verses 11 to 20 now. This is going to be on the focus is going to be, don't forget the Lord when you're prosperous, when you're in prosperity. And the engagement question for this particular section is, what can we do to prevent grateful people from being completely self-secure and self-sufficient? Verse 11. Take care that you do not forget the Lord your God by failing to keep his commandments, his ordinances, and his statutes that I'm commanding you today. When you have eaten your fill, and have built fine houses and live in them, and when your herds and flocks have multiplied, and your silver and gold is multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied, then do not exalt yourself, forgetting the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of slavery, out of the house of slavery, who led you through the great and terrible wilderness, an arid wasteland with poisonous snakes and scorpions. He made water flow for you from flint rock. He fed you in the wilderness with manna that your ancestors did not know, to humble you and to test you, and in the end to do you good. Do not say to yourself, my power and the might of my own hand have gotten me this wealth. But remember, the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, so that he may confirm his covenant that he swore to your ancestors, as he is doing today. If you do forget the Lord your God and follow other gods to serve and worship them, I solemnly warn you today that you shall surely perish. Like the nations that the Lord is destroying before you, so shall you perish, because you would not obey the voice of the Lord your God. So, final biblical unlock. How does one actually forget God when life goes well, right? How is it possible? Well, obviously it is possible because we've seen it in our own lives, right? We see people who merely forget God when everything is good, but then when things start to get tough, when the storms start to hit, when suffering starts to take place, then we all of a sudden we turn back to God. So forgetting is a habitual process that humans engage in, right? So repeated comfort, when we're comfortable, when we're repeatedly comfortable, that is precisely when we forget God. That's when it dulls memory of dependence. We realize, oh, I can do everything on my own, right? I'm fully dependent on myself. I don't need anyone or anything or any God to help me out. And this is the problem. And the legal warning is here. The legal warning shows how easily heart orientation can flip from God provided this for me to I fully earned this myself and I deserve this. And the cure is regular practices that re-anchor gratitude, whether it be sacrifices of thanks, whether it be communal testimony, whether it be mandated reminders like tithes and Sabbaths. That is what is necessary. What does Moses say to counter this selfish ambition, this selfish desire to say that everything comes from you? It says, take care that you do not forget the Lord your God by failing to keep his commandments. The commandments. We keep the commandments in order to remember the Lord our God, not to grow indifferent, not to be completely forgetful of his great works in our life and what he has done for us. So this is actually the important point to recognize, that when we have everything, right, when you have eaten your fill, as they say in verse 12, and have built fine houses and live in them, when your herds and flocks have multiplied, and your silver and gold is multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied, then do not exalt yourself, forgetting the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, who led you through great and terrible wilderness, an arid wasteland, with poisonous snakes and scorpions. He made water flow for you from the flint rock. You have to ask yourself, what do you have that the Lord your God didn't give you? What do you have that the Lord your God didn't give you? And it's basically nothing. You have nothing that the Lord your God didn't give you. The Lord causes his sun to rise on the good and on the evil. The sun rises because of the Lord. The earth is here because of the Lord. You exist because of the Lord. The Spirit of God that is within you, your consciousness, all of these things ultimately find their meaning, purpose, and their function in Christ. Augustine, as I said many times before, Augustine said, the Lord has made us for himself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in him. So that is the key we need to understand. Okay, let's see how this chapter fulfills Jesus Christ. Okay, so two things I want to talk about briefly. First, Deuteronomy 8 has formation by hunger, and it actually warns about prosperity, right? All of this points forward to Christ because he satisfies our hunger, both physical and spiritual. He reorients our desires. Jesus calls us, right, to seek the kingdom of heaven first, and warns that life is more than possessions. He takes the wilderness patterns, right, the testing, dependence, and daily bread, and fulfills them by providing himself. In John chapter 6 verse 33, he calls himself the bread of life, so that abundance becomes a relationship rather than security. And the Christian life inherits the discipline, the mercy, the gratitude, and daily dependence on God through Christ and the Spirit. As we read in Luke chapter 12 verse 15, and he said unto them, Take heed, and beware of covetousness, for a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesseth. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, I want to cast our minds again to Matthew chapter 4, and this might be the last time I go here, but this is really important because Jesus is tested by the devil in the wilderness in this particular chapter. So very recurring themes that we see throughout we see it throughout Deuteronomy as well. We saw it throughout Numbers, the wilderness testing. So I want to read this in full, verses 1 to 11. I love this section, and it's funny because I read this, and then I read a novel called The Brothers Karamazov, and a chapter within it is called The Grand Inquisitor, and it has actually a dialogue concerning this chapter, which I really love. Anyway, let's read. Verse 1 of Matthew chapter 4. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, afterwards he was hungry. Now when the tempter came to him, he said, If you are the Son of God, command that these stones become bread. But he answered and said, It is written, Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Deuteronomy chapter 8 verse 3, what we just read. Then the devil took him up into the holy city and set him on the pinnacle of the temple and said to him, If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, He shall give his angels charge over you, and in their hands they will bear you up, lest you dash your foot against a stone. Jesus said to him, It is written again, You shall not tempt the Lord your God, or put him to test. Deuteronomy 6:16. Again the devil took him up on an exceedingly high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, All these things I will give you if you fall down and worship me. Then Jesus said to him, Away with you, Satan, for it is written, You shall worship the Lord your God, and him only you shall serve. Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and ministered to him. So, as I said before, on numerous occasions, Deuteronomy chapter 6, Deuteronomy chapter 8, these are the chapters that Jesus quotes in order to rebut the devil, in order to avoid temptation. Okay, so how can we apply what we've learned in our everyday life? Well, I think it's important to recognize the idea that the daily bread moment, right? Where we get our own daily bread. Each day this week, before a meal, you need to say one sentence. It's grace, right? I know some people already do grace, and that's fantastic. I think it's important to recognize where your food or provision came from and how you can share it this week, right? Keep it short but regular. Pray before you eat your meals. And the second thing is, you don't want to be forgetting God when you're prosperous, right? So it's important to make a simple plan to link, like for example, whether it's your income, your time, your skill, to generosity, and decide a percentage to give or a day to serve monthly, and set a calendar reminder for accountability. Because when you're prosperous, that is precisely when you can forget God. So it's important to recognize what I have is ultimately not from myself, it's from God, right? So I have no obligation to this. That is, I need to give what I have rather than store it all for myself and hoard it. And when we do that, we're closer to having that heart that God wants us to have. Alright, well that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. We learnt in this episode that God used the wilderness to humble Israel so that they would learn daily dependence and not idolize prosperity, and that abundance is meant to produce worship, generosity, and faithful stewardship, not forgetfulness or pride, and that forgetting God in prosperity actually happens in degrees. in habits that reorient trust, and the law warns and prescribes remembrance practices. And practically speaking, this involves regular rhythms of gratitude, testimony, tithing, Sabbath that keep that dependence on God alive, even in seasons of prosperity. Next time, we're going to move to Deuteronomy chapter 9, which is from personal formation to covenant practice, and we'll revisit Israel's rebellion and Moses' intercession. If you enjoy this episode, please consider rating the show and following. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Otherwise, just have a blessed day. And remember, if you're not in your word, you're in your feelings. Godspeed.